Yeah, so thanks for coming and chatting to us today. We have Lorna, who is based in Leeds here in the UK, and we have Kian, who is in the south of Malaysia. But did you move back to Malaysia last year, was it? You were in
Yeah,
London.
yeah, due to the pandemic.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So Rocky and I have been undertaking this kind of digital, online, virtual residency, whatever you want to call it, called Reciprocal Space, which we've been doing for a couple of months now, which is really just a chance for us to kind of test new ideas, experiment, be quite playful, kind of have this dialogue and inform one another's practice. And we're both really interested in material and the sort of language of materials. Our first talk was called On Material, where we spoke to Kim and Sharon just about some of like the practicalities of working with materials, how we make material choices, how materials impact the spaces, kind of using traditional versus non-traditional materials, and we touched a little bit on the kind of cultural significance of some materials, which is something that we thought might be interesting to kind of delve a little bit deeper into today. Kind of, yeah, how culture is portrayed through materials and objects. And I think when we first thought about doing this talk on object, um, the first thing that we were kind of really questioning was what actually is an object, and how do you define an object, and what's the difference between object and material. So we kind of wanted to chat to you both today because we felt like you're both of you kind of touch on some kind of cultural heritage, kind of folk tradition type things in your practices, and that we felt like there was quite a lot of parallels in your practice, and we felt that you both have a strong interest in material, but there's a kind of an objectness to some of the art that you make, if objectness can be a word. um, so yeah, kind of, I guess from that starting point of what actually is an object. I think when we first emailed you, we included a dictionary definition,
Yeah.
just because that was like our go-to, which I think was um, an object is a material thing that can be seen or touched, or a personal thing to which a specified action or feeling is directed. And these definitions to me kind of seemed like it had quite a strong link to the way that we think about art, with the emphasis on seeing and touching, and how we might direct a kind of feeling or meaning to an object. Um, so Lorna, I know that your kind of sculptural works very much have a feeling of being objects. And in fact, you probably often, I think you describe them as objects quite a lot of the time, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, I use, I suppose, a mixture of found objects or bought objects, not just necessarily found in that sense, but I suppose ready-mades to some extent. And then I combine those quite a lot with artist-made objects. And I say artist-made objects just because I've made them, but that might also be a combination of little objects together, but they end up being a whole thing. And then I will either put them together as an installation piece, and then that's obviously a piece, I suppose, an object, an end object in itself. But yeah, I was thinking this with the material sort of side of, I do see other objects as being materials to make bigger objects, I suppose, my art objects. And I don't really see, yeah, I don't really put a limitation on that. I don't really put boundaries on those. I quite like it. I like that it's part of the process for me for collecting things and seeing things and searching for things, and then seeing how things will work together. And I'll let certain objects or materials sort of live beside one another for a bit. I might not necessarily join them. I'll just know that at some point I will use them, or they will speak to one another, and it will become another thing. So yeah, I definitely do see them as materials. in themselves. And then, yeah, and then sometimes I will completely take them apart or just use them as I've sort of seen fit. So yeah, that's kind of the process that I use, I suppose, objects as part of a material conversation.
Yeah, because actually we've kind of talked about a lot. It is how do we distinguish between material and object? And actually, I think that we use it very interchangeably. Like you said, you use a lot of found objects or bought objects, but that kind of exist in their own right.
Yeah.
Which is much like I use predominantly found objects and like a lot of like kind of discarded like junk objects, and then what he purchases a lot. So yeah, the way that we work with objects is like working with a material.
I found, sorry, in Laura's, the word you use a lot, or when you describe your pieces, you always put the word reclaimed in front of. And obviously that's how it's been found, and that's, you know, descriptive in that way. But I thought that was quite interesting that you've chosen to put that word there, because that is important, that they have been reclaimed, and that idea of saving something, or, you know, you've chosen it, but you're saving it the same, and saving all these objects for something else to become something, I think is quite
that's interesting actually, because I've always struggled when I've got to, you know, next to your artwork, when you've got to describe the materials that you've used, as we often have to. I've always struggled to know what to write, because sometimes, yeah, like I could say discarded clothing or found clothing, and you're right, I do often actually settle with reclaimed, because I feel like reclaimed has an action. It's like it kind of describes what I've done with what I've done with it when I found it.
I think there's an emotion behind it as well. Like, for me, that felt a really emotional world to sort of understand how you feel towards that object, maybe, or that material, and why you've chosen it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting actually.
Yeah, because like for me, like I think that I don't usually use a lot of found object, but because I keep thinking, like, I mean, for these conversations, I was thinking like how to differentiate about the materials and object. I think for me, I mean, object is something that it has to be, I mean, really careful to use it. Yeah, because it is more than a form, it's more than the shape. Like, I mean, in materials, I mean, I work a lot of materials, but I think materials have, you know, like more spaces, but object is somehow it has to be, I think I would rather to choose an object that really related to myself. Like this, I think this is also why that we use a lot of cultural objects. I mean, especially as a Malaysian Chinese. Yeah, so which when I saw Lorna works, which is I think I feel really interesting. Like I like to see like how you combine the object together, which is that's a lot of different object, but because I like I mean see through your website, but it's interesting that I can see that there's some symbol and some certain object which is appearing in your practice. Yeah, like for example, I see you use a lot of gold.
Yeah.
Gold things. Yeah, and then sometimes because I quite interested, like I saw the works that you I think is exhibit with Laura, because I saw Laura's work in the pictures in left bank, is it?
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting because I saw that you use the bamboo, like the bamboo and mix with the gold coin.
Yes.
Yeah, which the bamboo is really Chinese for us. Yeah. So yeah, like how you're going to choose like this object, like what you base on?
So when I was thinking back to, this piece, because I thought, you know, this is the thing that Laura's seen, first of all, with my work, and I realised I've got a lot going on there. Like, probably this is one of the most complicated, as in different things going on. And I think, as a space, I wanted to respond to quite a lot of things in that space. And I wanted to respond to the saint that was there, Margaret of Antioch, which was, you know, the proposal was onto this space, and you know, what's your connection with? And I wanted to do an offering to the space because it's a space that's no longer was a church, no longer works as a church, now is an art space. But as soon as anyone comes in, everybody's very much like, oh, you know, what was this space? What is this space? And so I very much felt I wanted to give something back to the space, and aware that I wanted to get people involved with it. And I wanted to try out a few things as well. I kind of, over the last few years, I've wanted to sort of introduce sort of more sensory, sort of have your senses, not just your visual senses sort of heightened, but that kind of that you want to taste something or you want to smell something, and try different techniques out. So it kind of allowed me to do a few things with that. I like making things en masse. I like doing repetition pieces of work, and I feel that's quite meditative, but also if I like a process, I choose a material that I want to use, and if I like that material and I like the process, they've kind of got to go hand in hand. And that kind of is quite, it's almost like catch-22. When I find one of those, I kind of need to make more because I'm enjoying it, but then I would choose a certain number that corresponds to certain things. So I will put certain limitations in, but yeah, there was quite a lot of things going on with the bamboo elements. That was a material that allowed me just to, I suppose, give me the structure that I needed for the actual base at the top, and then also make the chandelier pieces as well, the actual structures that, you know, of drainage that you would put obviously food in it. I like the idea that they were used for food, but now I was using them in a food kind of offering, feasting kind of way, but for another purpose. So I quite like to play on past uses or past connotations with stuff, and yeah, get people thinking about objects in different ways, in different forms that you could use them. But yeah, there's a lot going on.
But it was that kind of multi-sensory because we could actually physically eat the sweets, couldn't we?
Yeah, and
Really?
now it's like, could you imagine putting that in a proposal now? It just would be like, no. We need tongs, we need but yeah, I wanted people to interact with it, and there's that thing of, I think with objects you want to touch as well.
Yeah.
And I always think, because I use things like that maybe like gold or look overly precious when they're generally not, but I do try, I suppose I give them that boundary, and that people feel that they can't really interact with things, when actually I do want people to interact with certain things. I wouldn't be, you know, heartbroken if someone went in and moved something or that, but I did want that interaction with the people because they use the space, so I wanted them to use the work as well to some extent.
Yeah, well, Kian, you've done a lot of work where you take rubbings of tombs and statues from cemeteries, and there's a very strong link there with kind of traditional kind of rituals and customs. And I find it really interesting that you choose to take the rubbings with like the tin foil. I normally refer to it as tin foil, but some people call it like silver foil or aluminium foil.
Aluminium, yeah, sometimes.
Which is quite like a cheap, easily accessible material, like everyday material that you use in like cooking and stuff like that. But then you kind of make these really elaborate, beautiful structures with it from these kind of big, kind of very permanent, heavy stone objects. And then, I mean, I'm guessing it's quite difficult to work with the aluminium foil because it tears easily and it's not really made to last. Like, kind of, what was the connection there for you between these objects and then the material?
I think the very beginning I been experiment with this material because of my identity issue. But the very beginning I tried to take out further perspective about Chinese diaspora when I was studying in Taiwan. There's a very heavy issue in this context, like how obviously Chinese people consider themselves as ethnic Chinese or international Chinese or something like that. And at that time, I tried to, because I love to collect things very quickly, despite of using photograph camera. So that time I'm thinking which material is very easy, very suitable for me to apply with my work. So I start working with tin foil paper, and later I found that this material, I can play a few points like contrast, illusions, and also working with site specificity, use this material. Like when Mogi invited me to join this talk and I saw the topic, material and object, I felt that it's a very broad topic for me. Yeah, and after that, I how to say, I feel like for me, material is a pre-object before becoming an object. And in my art practice, I apply material between two objects. Like, let me simply explain, like tinfoil paper, I will treat it like like a medium to engage with two objects. Like I use the tinfoil is an object, and I apply it as a medium to engage with particular object like terms or some kind of household thing. And so yeah, and another point I would like to say is I use this material to contrast the fragileness and the unstable phenomenon in different art space. Yeah.
Yeah, as a material, I imagine it's very fragile to work with. And when you have them, do you keep them? What's their longevity once you've made?
No, because the main topic I would like to criticize the history or the identity thing. I think if I still use the very solid, okay, if I still use the solid material to talk about the heavy history, for me, in some level, it's very boring. You know, it's too direct to talk about the heavy thing. So I try to play with a very fragile material like tinfoil.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because that normally the cemetery then it's made by like marble, which is a really heavy materials, but Kian work is really light. Like sometimes it's hang in the museum, like it's like really. So it's quite nice to see the contrast, like using a very. It's not only on materials, but even the wave, which is a very contrast. I think it's really interesting. Like, yeah.
Like Laura just mentioned, this material is actually very cheap, and you can get it everywhere in the store market. And after I contrast or collect the rubbing, tinfoil rubbing, and into the exhibition space or white cube space, people would think about because the lighting effect, people will feel like so luxury. Yeah, I like the illusion and the contrast playing in this medium.
Yeah,
I think that the shiny magpie
Yeah.
sort of is just everybody just it makes people want to go and see something and then discover more. And I think on a really base level, material can just do that. Can make you cross a gallery and go, what is that? And then you can find out more. I really like that about certain materials because I think it's that awe-inspiring as well, that excitement that you would get as a child going in places. I think I believe that art should give you some instant joy to some extent with that kind of thing. And I do think, yeah, materials are a lovely way to capture that and be able to, evoke that. And it's great, I think, when you find a material that really calls to you. When I don't know about you guys, but when I'm sort of looking around materials, I love going around like hardware shops or haberdasheries or just somewhere in places where the material's meant for something else. Probably, they're not art shops necessarily, and you find something you're like, yes, this is gonna do what I need it to do visually and the strength and convey, what you need it to do. And I think that's a seeking out thing as well, which is part of the art process. But it's great.
Another point I think I can share. The reason why I use this tin foil, because it's really cheap for making artwork.
Yeah. That's the main point.
Yeah, the main point.
That's really important.
But you can play then.
Found clothing. I started using found clothing as a student, and I just needed to be able to really bulk stuff out because I'm obsessed with kind of scale and size. And there was just clothing on the street, and it was like the cheapest, most accessible thing for me to access to get where I wanted to be. And it's these practicalities that kind of take you down a route. And now I'm really interested in kind of the manufacturing of clothing, the history of clothing, the kind of relationship clothing has with the body, and all of these kind of really interesting concepts to do with this material that I essentially ended up using because it was cheap and I could get hold of it really easily. So it's nice that you discover all these other things just by practical elements.
I have to say, going back to the university thing of things you first started using with, I used to use a lot of mussel shells, and I still have crates of them, but I used to have them for dinner. I'd eat thing, and then I'd clean them up, and then the next day I'd have a bulk to make. And I used to make these big installations where I'd sort of clasp the things in mussel shells and have them hung. And I used to work out how many more I needed. And then I'd go to the supermarket and be like, right, okay, I've got 4 more days of eating mussels this week, And my housemates would be like, thanks for the smell, thanks for clearing. But you do it, don't you? And then shells have stayed with me. And then either oyster or scallop or the good old mussel. But and then you start learning about the ecosystems of them and sustainability on that side. Oh, sorry, what were you going to say? No. I was just saying, I do think to be able to play, if you get things that are cheaper and you find something, you are more creative with them. Do you know what I mean? That you win take more chances with those materials. I think when you start upscaling or being able to afford more expensive materials or thinking about those, because I've always, been asked, I suppose, would you work in gold or silver or that kind of things that you reference and that you try to make things look like. That's when I get a bit scared. Obviously, very expensive. Wouldn't be doing those unless they were like miniature, obviously, like teeny tinies. But that kind of thing of when you start to, you need an element of play, and I think you need to find materials that you're comfortable that allow you to do that, to allow you to think through them and to kind of get it what it is that you're trying to make out there, or at least in a sort of a structural way that you feel happy with.
And it's interesting that we talk about cheap materials and that kind of side of things, because in your practice, Lorna, you like the idea of value is kind of a running theme, isn't it? And talk about the kind of monetary value of materials, and where there's like a kind of really clear scale. I think once you include like a quantitative element like monetary value, then everything is on a scale from here to here, and you can place everything kind of in order. It's like a way of organizing something, isn't it? So it's like a way of organizing objects by value.
I love the idea of organizing to that degree. Like, I do like the idea of scale. That really does appeal to me. But I suppose also the value, that idea of, I suppose, an artwork being worth a certain amount because of its material value is you know, and again, sort of thinking about how do you keep something like tinfoil, like how many times can you show that piece? And do you want to show that piece multiple times, or is it a thing of actually, I just want that impact of first? And I think materials make you have to have those conversations with yourself as a maker, because there'll come a point where unless you're making something out of something really hard, or, you know, those sort of more, I don't even want to say masculine materials, but I always got told at university, like I worked with more feminine things. And I think if you, and Laura's probably said, if you work with textiles at some point and you're a girl, you immediately get asked that question. But I don't think you get asked that question if you're a boy working with those materials. I think you're, oh, why are you working in those materials? Like you get, like it's a positive question. And yeah, I sort of, I don't know how I feel about that. Do you know what I mean? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in that, especially the boys, I suppose. What would you go for those kind of, I suppose, softer material?
Not me first, please.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about like sewing stuff, like knitting stuff, yeah, I think Laura knows as well. I really hate it. Like, yeah, because I mean, my practice is always I use a lot of machine. Yeah, I'm like a machine guy, so I had to use different tools to make like really precise work. And then yeah, so I feel like, I mean, this kind of things like which is, I think we should still, just now when you mentioned about this fish, remind me about, I think, Cornell, Laura. Yeah, I think there's the other artists which engage with our project, which I also feel very surprised, like when I heard Laura say that he did the knitting by himself. Yeah, I think sometimes this kind of mindset, it just came to us like really natural, like you know, like female artists, like they always like it's naturally like they will do stuff like that. Yeah, but for me, yeah, I think that's not something that I would like to do. Yeah.
But recently, as part of the residency, because we're kind of trying to work with one another's materials, so I went and bought like a jigsaw and a sander, and I've been kind of cutting up wood and playing around with wood a lot. Is what Mokyi does a lot of. And then Mokyi like hand sewed like a kind of lantern using like
Lantern, yeah.
from a building site. And yeah, and Mokyi kept messaging me like, it's taking so long to make. But I think that's the difference between hand making and then if you're used to using machinery. I don't know, machinery feels much more instant. Like I'm even finding as I'm working with wood, I'm getting so much done in a day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so used to those kind of really small repetitive, whether it's like knitting or weaving or sewing. It feels like a slow burner. You can be doing it for quite a long time, and it really gradually builds up. And that's actually what I really like about working by hand. But I suppose, Kian, your practice is actually quite hands-on. You can't rely on machinery to kind of do what you're doing, and I'm guessing it's quite detailed.
Yeah, you remind me something like when I studied in Goldsmiths, you know, because in Goldsmiths there are quite a lot the workshops, like also including the 3D printing, the mainstream workshop in many schools now. And one day my tutor asked me, why you don't want to try to use the machine help you to construct the work you want. And I say I against it. try to against this using this how to say making a work using this industrial way. And this is my how to say my intentions. And but I like the idea you guys just mentioned. The thing is hard to preserve because that is the reason why I choose tinfoil paper, because it's very hard to move, to keep, or to reserve. It's but the connotation is very connected to the issue I want to express, like history or identity.
Yeah.
Something is very fragile and illusion. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so intrigued just in the practicalities of your work. Like, how do you store it? How do you preserve it? Do you? Yeah.
I can show something. Please, I need to turn my laptop. You can see the paper board.
Yeah, paper box.
Can you see the paper? Yeah, actually, I spent a lot of money to to buy the paper board. Because the tinfoil is very cheap, but the paper board is very expensive. So
Yeah.
I need another container to protect my work. Yeah.
Like that really stressed me out. The actual having to store, and then someone being like, "Oh yeah, should we get that open again?" And you're like, "Oh, is it going to be okay?" And you sort of try to go down the proper archival. This is what you should do. This is the stuff you should store something in. This is, you're doing it properly, and that kind of, and the box thing. Just, yeah, I bet you feel better now. It's in its box and it's safe.
Yeah. Actually, my rubbing, after I collect from the particular object, tombstone or something, I always cut it in piece by piece, convenient to move to my studio, and then I will combine again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it will present like a very fragmented object. Yeah.
I bet they're very, very beautiful. It's fragments. The more that they get used, or
yeah, I like the reflections. Yeah.
It's interesting to me that the kind of preservation and taking care of the tinfoil structures is kind of a challenge, because sort of the subject matter, which is the kind of tombs and all the kind of objects that you take rubbings from in the cemeteries, that's all about kind of keeping something alive, and it's trying to keep something like lasting, and keep something in existence for longer, because it's like all about the memories of a person and the fact that a person exists. And so I find it interesting that then one of the challenges that comes with the kind of practicalities of your practice is to keep that in existence. And I suppose that's the whole part of the juxtaposition between the object that you're taking a rubbing from and then the art object.
I've been inspired a lot by a Buddhist term called impermanent.
Impermanent.
Because in Buddhist thought they always, in Buddhist thought they think every material, even mentality, is impermanent. Nothing is permanent, including the material thing. So when I engage with like cemetery, when I try to make a connection to death, afterlife, or like diasporic issue, this kind of element remind me the impermanent aspect, how to appropriate this idea with this kind of a particular issue in my art practice. Yeah.
And how was it? Because I saw that whilst you were in London, you went and took some rubbings of some of the cemeteries in London. And the difference is really striking between the kind of Chinese cemeteries, which are so detailed and beautiful, and then the cemeteries in London, and actually they look really kind of, I don't know, dull?
No. Actually, the Western cemetery are very organized compared to Asian
Chinese
cemetery. Yeah, especially Chinese cemetery, because Chinese people is very I don't know how to express in English. They always want to gain something, like they have their intention or direction, like they always go to the cemetery once a year. Yeah. Because the festival, because the Qingming festival. Yeah. But after that, the Qingming festival is actually to to do this remembering to how to say together with other family
Yeah.
around the tombs with their descendants. But after that, many Chinese people, they, because the like 4D or something, like they want to pray for something always.
Lottery.
Lottery, yeah, lottery. They want to,
yeah.
They want to pray something like from their descendants. It's very business thing, for me. But
it's very money minded.
Yeah, very money minded. And in Western cemetery, I never see this kind of thing, and people very enjoy walking through the cemetery, and yeah, and it's very different. And one thing, one time, the first time I went to, I think is Nunhead Cemetery, next to, I think near to Goldsmith. It's not too far, and quite a lot of people, they saw an Asian guy doing something very weird in the cemetery. The Asian guy is me, and then used some tinfoil paper, rubbing maybe their family terms, I don't know. And then, but I think, the result is different. If I do this kind of process in Malaysia, people might get angry.
Yeah.
Because I don't get the permission to get in the cemetery. But in London, people are very curious, and then a conversation will begin in the cemetery. They will ask me a lot of questions. It is work project. It is archaeological thing or something. Yeah, it's very interesting to me.
Yeah, because the tombstone is like a house for people who pass away. So and like what Kian mentioned just now, there's always a competitions like like you have neighbors, and then the neighbors build like really nice tombstone, and they will build even nicer, like even better materials. So it's like because it's a space like for us to gathering sometime at each year, one time each a year. So and then we believe that if we can make a very nice cemetery, we treat our ancestor very nice, so it will bring us like fortune, it will bring us like good luck, yeah, in our life, in our like in anything in our life, yeah. So this is our belief in
yeah, because Chinese funeral custom, they believe after that people had a new life called afterlife in other dimensions. So the tombs like a medium connect to the present life people and the afterlife people. Yeah.
And Mokki, you told me you sent me that picture of all of the paper cars. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And I think I was just like, oh, they're really nice little objects. And you were like, yeah, but they're for burning. And you were telling me about how you kind of burn things.
Yeah. Because we have those shop, it's like we sell all this kind of how we call, like maybe a praying for Chinese praying and folk stuff. So the festive that Kian mentioned just now, so I show Laura the picture, is like they have a lot of paper made cars, like small car.
Paper effigy.
Yeah, and then they even have like paper made watches, shoes, clothes. Yeah, so this is all that we believe that we burn it, and then it will send it to our like grandparents or our ancestors. Yeah, so
it's very practical.
It's very practical. Yeah, we believe that they can have a house, after life. They can have, can have iPad, iPhone, have cars. Yeah. So it's very interesting, but yeah, but I think it's also for artists. I mean, it's very it's a very nice object for us to really explore about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it plays into the idea of like something being permanent or impermanent, and
Mm.
but you've used a lot of incense
Mm.
in practice, haven't you? Which is um, kind of a very culturally significant
Yeah.
object
Yeah.
to you. But what led you to use incense in the first place?
I think this is some questions like as a Chinese, because we always do something to get something return, like what like Kian mentioned, like we burn stuff, you know, we pray to the ancestor because we hope to get, you know, a fortune or something else from them. So same thing, like when we burn the incense, we pray. So it's somehow for me, this is kind of like superstitions, and that's very interesting that I mean, based on the materials, which is the materials actually is it is made to be disappear. The existing of the material is to disappear, like so. So I like this idea, and I like the process, and I think and then I started to like, you know, study about the incense, and I figure out like because we are a multicultural background in Malaysia, so there's a lot of different kind of incense, and incense that have different function and purpose as well. So I think it's really nice, like and they make it into a different shape. So the shape for Chinese is always like it make it into the like a money shape, like yeah. So it's very nice to, you know, I have this kind of a form to make it into my materials, and I believe that if I preserve it, like not burning it, is actually keeping the idea of the materials, which is I really feel interested on this. Yeah.
I I found a very interesting point in Moki work, because when you say you try to keep it, not to burn it,
Mm.
is in some level like you try to deconstruct the function from the
Yeah.
very initial idea. Like I
Mm.
also uh, like because incense in and different ethnicity, there are different interpretation.
Yeah.
Like in India, in the ancient India, they also use incense to clear the smell, like
Mm.
because at that time it's very hard to shower, and they need to use the incense to clear the smell. Also, according to some sutras from Hinduism or Buddhism, they say the goals or the different dimensions people, then they have to smell the incense to eat something, because they don't
Mm.
have they don't have body, so that so they need to smell the incense from the present life people they're burning to them. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I found very interesting. Yeah.
So I also use, you know, like it's kind of like a gold paper, which is we burn it as a money. And when I saw Lorna works, and because you use a lot of coins or gold stuff, I think it's quite interesting. Like I'm not sure. Maybe you will feel interested, like this kind of like gold paper, and but what is the reason? Because I read your bio, you mentioned about monetary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's that meaning, but I mean, but what is the practice about? I mean, when you use all the coins and gold, and what is it about money? Like,
Well, so this is gonna be a long-winded thing here, I reckon. I'm gonna have to launch into. So I'm doing part-time practice-based PhD at the university. I'm looking at hoards, archaeological hoards, and I've chosen 4 hoards to sort of base the research on, and I've broken them down by their materiality. So I chose 1 gold hoard, 1 silver hoard, 1 copper alloy, and 1 leather hoard. And I was very aware that when I started doing the PhD that I make work to look overly precious or to look to be another material and to give it those qualities, those, I suppose, that give it more value. And when I started looking sort of at the hoards, I was very aware that I was looking at objects that have been kept for their monetary worth. So they might be very beautiful things, but when it comes down to brass tags, you know, they're made out of gold. That's why it was kept. It's made out of silver. You know, certain things were either hack silver, kept as a whole. Certain objects are more broken and more used because they're less valuable than the other things that might be in a hoard. So certain objects end up protecting other ones because of their materiality. And with things that are of a monetary value, I was very aware I needed to have that conversation as to why I use certain materials or certain looking materials on objects, because they're never the true material, if you know what I mean. So I'd be interested in, I suppose, something that looks like gold as a material so that I could then play with it. I would never really play with something that was of a high monetary value because I wouldn't feel like it, I wouldn't feel comfortable, I don't think, but also that it's, I suppose it is that thing of it is still in sort of a thing state rather than an art object state, and that kind of, so for me, yeah, it's all steeped in that value, that as soon as the material becomes or object becomes very valuable, it somehow becomes less of something that I can work with. And that might change over time, but it's those materials, it's those either, I suppose, the gilding or using, when I think of the aluminium foil, I think of sort of, I've used sort of silver leaf and gold leaf before to paint a sheen on things, and I like that it does tarnish with the silver leaf, and that it only sort of lasts for a very short period of time, and it has that really human kind of quality about it, that stuff does age and does get used. Whereas the objects that I'm looking at for my PhD, once they're found and they're kind of restored, you know, a lot of them do look like you'd imagine they look like the day they went into the ground. And I do have that kind of need to look at those qualities within materials and sort of work out whether that's, you know, what do I want those qualities to be? Do I want them to have that kind of work feel about them, that they're doing something and you can sort of see their action, or whether actually we do want this just material just to stay very permanent rather than the impermanence that we were talking about before. You know, gold doesn't change, or rarely does, and that's why we love it, isn't it? It's, we can guarantee everything by it. And so yeah, it's something, and I think as a material you can't not reference gold without thinking about it in monetary terms, just because so many people do, whether you do or not. You know, my immediate thought is never gold bar, but I'm aware that for a lot of people, you know, yeah, it's money, it's that kind of thing, rather than just a very shiny object that we all just like to look at, or just feel really good when we're next to it, or it has a warmth or a really nice feel. Yeah, it's still one of those things, I think it excites people, doesn't it? Rightly or wrongly, it's, people want to find gold in the ground when you go digging for something. That's the yes. Rather than a piece of pottery, but there we go. It's an interesting one.
Yes, I like that you said something about how you don't feel like you could play with a material if it was like really valuable, like if it was like real gold, like you just wouldn't be able to play with it in the same way. And it reminds me of that kind of childlike playfulness of where you pretend something is something else, like you pretend like maybe aluminium foil is some jewelry because jewelry is an adult thing, or you know, an expensive thing. And when you're a child, it's, you kind of like to make materials into other things, or you just make use of the objects around your house. Like everyone's used pots and pans to pretend like they're playing the drums when you're a kid, because you know drums are big and expensive. And I don't know, there's just like real nice playfulness to the way both Lorna and Kian use the materials to kind of suggest these really big, expensive, monetary value items that are kind of really precious in a way, but with these kind of like materials that, yeah, are kind of pretending to be that thing.
I think you can, for me anyway, it feels like I can get a handle on it and feel, I know it's you feel you can go in there and you can do it, and then you can have the discussion. Whereas I think if you were given something so valuable, that will be a stumbling block, even like it's too big. You kind of need that, off you go, and then it's yeah, I can, these are big things we're talking about, you know, these are things that you want to do well and you want to do right, and you don't want, you want to give them the reverence that they deserve. So you need to, I think, like you said, by working fast, you kind of want to gather things in and then have that thinking time to then let it play out, see what it does. And I think materials, if you think through them, you get there. Or if that's your natural inclination, I think materials are a really lovely way to do that.
Kian and Mok Yi, I'm a conversation that me and Mok Yi have quite regularly, is I just don't, I struggle to feel like I portray any kind of culture in my practice, because I'm not sure what my culture is, and I don't feel like I have a cultural identity necessarily. And so I'm always so interested in Mok Yi's work, and I feel like I've learned so much about Mok Yi's culture just through his practice. And I'll say, well, why have you done this like this? And he'll be like, well, actually, this is a really important object, you know, and I'll learn a little bit of the history behind it. And in our last talk, I asked Sharon, like, do you feel like you have a culture? Because it's something that I'm still trying to grasp. Kind of, my family's kind of from all over the UK, so I don't necessarily feel like I've got one place that's like my home, or that I kind of have a real affinity with. And yeah, we've got the kind of European element of British culture or UK culture, where there's kind of this like constant push and pull of, like, some people feel really European and that the UK is part of Europe. Some people, I think, feel like it's completely separate, and there are big differences. I mean, we had that conversation as well, Mok Yi and myself, just about like how European do I feel like I am, and the UK is very different to Europe, but then there are, like, we're still part of this kind of Europe thing. And I really struggle with it. And so I'm kind of, well, I suppose I'd like to ask Lorna, how do you feel? But I'd also like to ask Mok Yi and Kian, like, why is your culture such a big part of your practice, and why do you enjoy to kind of portray your culture through art? I mean, I don't know. I've just asked everybody this different questions there, so I don't know who wants to start. But it's something that I feel like I struggle with. So I'm just so interested to hear other people's views.
Yeah. Can answer. It's
Yeah,
your turn.
Despite talk about using culture, I would say I question the culture, because you know, I would say I used to be a very conservative Chinese when I was very young. And after that, I went to a different country and gained a different life experience. I feel that the culture, the identity the parent or the government or the education gave us is so fragile and so illusion to me, because they always give us a formulation, teach us how to be a person they want us to be. Like, you need to be a Chinese, you have to do some, you have to practice some costume, some ceremony every year. But does every people really understand the meaning of the ceremony? What does the ceremony mean? And so in my art practice, I would more like to question the culture, and not directly to gain the culture or to use the culture in my work. And also in another in sorry in another question is, I think the artist used a particular culture in his art practice, have to very be careful, or have to use it very accurately. Because if you say you appropriate this culture in your work, not really accurately, it will be like you purchase the culture in your work. You purchase some particular culture from some ethnicity or from some community for me. So it's have to be very careful. Yeah. I know a bit serious. Please turn to Moki.
No, I think because we came from, I mean, it's a very cultural, complicated background. Because we have different races, we are multi-races country, which is we are really not we are. I mean, like most of us like really proud of. You know, like we have different races, and but I think sometimes like it's because why we have to really concern a lot of the cultures. It sounds like we really want to preserve it, but at the same time, I think it's also because that we think it is really fragile. Like you need to do this thing to remind who you are. Yeah, so because we came from, it's really complicated because we have different races, we have different migrants, and then we was colonized by UK, by British, you know, like so it's our, you know, our conversation is always like, oh, this is from Indian, this is from Malay, this is actually from the colonizations, yeah. And then we have different dialects in our Chinese as well, at which we have different culture as well. So I think this is also why that we so aware about our culture, because sometimes we don't really know like what is our real, you know, like and this is also why that when I use a cultural object, um, is always confused. Like, is this is about religions, or this is traditional, or this is culture, or this is custom. Yeah, so I think every families they have different practice. So in my families, my parents they just treat it like you know, like you are Chinese, so you have to do it. Yeah, it's never about religions, but it's actually about religion. But so they have different, even different Chinese family, we have different interpretations about that. And this is I found it very interesting. Like, you know, we just do it to remind who you are, you know, like and to remind like this is your culture. Okay, you have to burn the incense, you know, you have to you know, you have to do all this stuff like to know who you are. So yeah, I think this is why that we so aware about the culture. Yeah, but I feel because I talked to this topic to Laura a lot of times, and she keep told me like I really don't know what's culture I am, like, you know, what is British culture. Yeah. So how you
Yeah,
think, like, Lorna?
It is a hard one because, so I don't know if it's a case of, you know, where your family's always lived or where you were born. I think maybe like place means a big, you know, are you from the north? Are you from the south? Do you come from
Mm,
Wales? Do you come from Scotland? I suppose in England that feels like a big thing. We always talk about the north-south divide. I think in the arts, it's always felt that, I say it's always felt, I'm probably of the generation of, I went to a northern university, I didn't go to an art school, I made a decision to stay up north, I suppose, and it felt that there weren't as many opportunities, or you had to, you know, it was a time when the internet was just starting, you sent stuff on CDs, you maybe didn't get a response, you know, it was like you had to physically go to the place to apply for things or take your work down to stuff. And I do think that I definitely feel northern because, you know, I've based myself up here for most of my career. My parents originally were from here, from different places up north, but for there, they, you know, I was born in London. We lived in Switzerland for a little bit, came back, but spent predominantly teenage years and university years up here. And I think there is that kind of, I think that's probably the most northern, when I say like my family, I suppose they've always two sides of Yorkshire, like we can't find anything else. Like I honestly, like if you cut me in half, that's like, but I don't know, I feel that that's what defines me. I don't know. I feel, you know, I feel proud. You know, I suppose I wouldn't ever not tell people, but like I suppose in your accent gives you away, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
Then you have the discussion. Or for me, my accent was a bit jumbled, because I suppose when you're when you're a child, at different points, I was in different parts, and you know, you're speaking to different people, so I don't sound that northern. So I will always be asked, "Where are you from?" You know, and I don't see that as a bad thing or a good thing. It's a point, I suppose, of conversation. But yeah, I suppose how it fits into my work, or how I sort of identify or bring it in culturally. I suppose I can only really think that I suppose on a subconscious level, like the underdog materials and objects. I feel like I probably am putting those things forward, or wanting to save them, or wanting to keep them, or because it's that, come on, these guys are worth being here too. And that probably is something culturally instilled in me, whether rightly or wrongly or therapy wise, I don't know, but it's that kind of, you know, come on, give something a go, don't just dismiss something. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's not, even though, you know, obviously paradoxically I like to make things very overly shiny, it's a case of, you know, come on, let's get excited about this kind of thing. And I suppose that kind of made you a men's mentality, that you might not be able to afford to do this or do this, but you're just crack on. But whether that's a good thing or not is another thing. But I don't know, Laura, how do you feel after all this? I feel like this is a therapy session.
I just find it so hard. So when you were talking about place, I mean, all my family traditionally has come from up north, but I've never lived up north. I've been up north like twice, I think.
Where did you go? Who do I do?
For my exhibition at Leeds.
Yeah.
And then I had another exhibition near Newcastle, and so I've only been up north twice to exhibit.
Did you feel it in your bones though when you went past Birmingham? Did you feel this?
Yeah, I mean, I've always supported Man United, and I've always been very proud of it because my dad instilled it in me from a very young age. But like, I just don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was so excited to go up to Leeds when I did for the first time, and I was age, I don't know, I can't remember how long ago that exhibition was, but I was probably like 25, 26. So I'd never been to any, and my family's from mainly Manchester or Yorkshire. So I did have this weird feeling of like, I'm going back to where all my family's from. But I mean, my parents both, well, my mum's family's from Yorkshire, but she lived all over and they moved a lot. My dad left Manchester age 19 and moved to London and then never went back. So even they're very detached from it. And then, you know, I was born in London, grew up in Kent, now live in Devon. I don't feel like any one place is necessarily my home.
I do think the parents thing though is an interesting where there's a lot, I think, that sort of left the north to seek a better, you know, to seek more work elsewhere, you know, and I think that's just how you move, isn't it? And I suppose it's the same for everybody, that's how families move, and then either decide to stay or decide to relocate back or that. Yeah,
I suppose, I mean, Mokyi talks a lot about, you know, like your family have, because, you know, they're Chinese Malaysian, they've got very strong link to like China. And I do suppose we get these kind of ideas drip fed to us where our parents are from, and the cultures that they like align themselves with. And I don't know, I think I'm still figuring it out.
But I think me and Kian, we are quite similar. Like I think our families, I mean the background, I mean we still have that kind of link to the like a real Chinese, you know, like Chinese. But this is also the complicated part. Not all the Chinese is Malaysia like that. Yeah. Some of them they can't speak Chinese, they can't speak Mandarin. Some of them they are really localized, and then they don't know where they're from. Yeah. So yeah, even in Chinese, I mean we have different culture, I should say, like we practice different culture as well. Yeah.
I think Mogi remind me the motivation where I try to question identity or family background, because I'm the first generation who have the blood relationship to my father, because my father was adopted, my grandfather was adopted, so we don't know, we don't actually know who we came from. So this is why, because I can't get the answer now, because the old people already buried in the cemetery. So I can't get an answer. This is why this is why I try to apply this for your people to rub so many tombstones. It's actually it's also in a way to question, but the answer never get it. Yeah.
My one is very different. I have we have a books, like, you know, I don't know how big is a book.
Yeah, I also don't know how to call the book. Family tree.
Family tree. Yeah, like they have recorded like this is my family. Like we have a surname like Lee. Yeah, so it's like I think they can trace back to 600 years ago. You know, like who is the first ancestor, and then we have a family tree like until my generations. Yeah, so yeah, this is like, so we have different practice. I mean, yeah, so, and my family is, especially my father's, like since I was kids, like he always like remind me like you have to know who you are, where you're from, you know. Yeah, so I think this is also why that we aware so much about our culture. Yeah.
I envy you so much.
Envy so much.
Yeah.
Family tree. I don't know. In fact, we don't.
Did I have family trees?
Events that you know where key people were. I think for our family anyway. But I think there is that one. You know, I think there's that thing of it's nice that you want to know. You know, when you think about the things that you can go on in the UK with like ancestry.com, where you can put your things in and then try and sort of find your heritage and that. And I just think, wow, you know, that people do that for a living and that can produce these final things and say, this is it. This is have a good read through. I think it's fascinating. It is fascinating.
But I think that there is some issue or some problem in this Chinese style family tree, because a serious problem like the patriarchy, or the, how to say, the patriarchal problems, like only female Chinese, sorry, only
Only
male
male
Chinese can record it, can
in the
record
books.
in the books.
Okay.
Yeah.
So females cannot, and or I would say like I think this is a very serious problem, especially in the modern or the contemporary society when we look at it. Yeah.
I think
But
things
actually, you're not.
with records.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, what did you say?
No, I was going to say, with us, it's not. I say with something like looking at ancestry.com, when you look for the female parts, you know, if you're doing that kind of, there's relatively never really any information as to what that person did, or other than, you know, you might get a name as to that person and then their age, but maybe even sometimes not even the beginning part, you know, just a letter, or it doesn't go back that far. It's very hard to trace anything that way, or just having the records of those. I think it is still quite rare past 200 years or so, isn't it, really? I think that when you find detailed records about certain females, you know, it is still quite rarity within a family. But I do think certain stories then get passed down, like a narrative. Like I can think of a couple of narratives of strong females within our family that are getting passed down. But it's interesting, the women that know those stories and then tell other women, and that you go, okay, so if we were going to look for something, could we find something? And then it's the track, you know, kind of going through and going, no, I know that this existed, you know, because so and so told me, and I trust so and so. But I wonder whether, yeah, I think narrative history is an interesting one for both genders to sort of see how accurate, yeah, certain narratives are really, why they're important.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've kind of kept you for longer than we promised. I just wanted to say thanks so much for taking part, and it's been really enjoyable and really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time out.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Nice to meet you guys.
Bye.
Hope to see you
It's
soon.
lovely.
You too. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.